Have you ever given your heart to someone who made you feel like you were easy to forget? Like no matter how much love, effort, and loyalty you poured in, they just didn't see you. Worse, they saw you and still chose to ignore you. Let me tell you something that might sting now, but will empower you later. You were the gift. Not because you were perfect, but because you showed up, fully, deeply, honestly. In a world where most people barely scratch the surface. And now he's gone, or worse, still around but emotionally absent. And you're left wondering, did I matter at all? Here's the truth: the regret isn't yours to carry. It's his. Because one day, when the noise quiets, the distractions fade, and the silence echoes, he'll remember you and realize he didn't just lose a relationship, he lost a rare soul. This is your reminder of what you brought to the table, and why the best revenge is no revenge at all, just becoming unreachable to anyone who couldn't recognize your value when it mattered. You brought something rare to the table, something most people spend years hoping to find. Your presence, your energy, your loyalty, your effort. The way you noticed the small things. The way you cared without being asked. The way you believed in him, sometimes more than he believed in himself. That wasn't ordinary. That wasn't average. That was a gift. But what happens when someone treats your love like it's replaceable? Like you're just one option among many? You start to question whether you gave too much, cared too quickly, or hoped too deeply. But the problem was never that you showed up fully. The problem was that he didn't recognize what was standing right in front of him. People often confuse being emotionally unavailable with being chill or independent. But what it really is, a fear of depth, a fear of presence. And when you're someone who can go deep, someone who wants to connect authentically, being with someone like that can feel like loving a ghost. They're physically there, but emotionally vacant. They keep you close enough to not lose you, but never close enough to truly have you. That's the kind of dynamic that makes you second guess yourself. But let's be very clear: in that confusion, that instability, that feeling of never knowing where you stand, that's not chemistry, that's emotional chaos. And the reason you felt so off balance wasn't because you were lacking. It was because you were trying to anchor yourself to someone who was never grounded in the first place. When someone ignores your value, it doesn't mean you didn't have any. It means they weren't capable of receiving what you had to give. That's not your burden to carry. That's theirs. You weren't an option. You were the prize, the real thing, the kind of partner who brings peace, fun, fire, and foundation. The kind of person who listens when it matters and stays when it's hard. You don't meet people like that every day. But here's the catch: being the prize doesn't mean you get chosen by everyone. In fact, it often means you'll be overlooked by people who haven't done the work to appreciate something real. When someone is used to shallow, temporary, surface-level connections, they won't know what to do with something real, solid, and powerful. And instead of stepping up, they shrink, they pull back, they choose the easier option. Not because it's better, but because it's safer for someone who isn't ready. You were not too much. You were not too emotional, too intense, or too available. You were just too much for someone who was too little. That's not arrogance, that's clarity. And it's a clarity you need to hold on to, especially in moments when doubt creeps in. Because trust me, there will come a time when he looks back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but one day, when he's sitting across from someone who doesn't challenge him, doesn't comfort him, doesn't inspire him. He's going to remember you. He's going to remember how you made him feel. Not just the fun, not just the physical connection, but the safety of being seen, the gift of being known. And in that moment, the regret will hit, because he'll finally understand that you weren't just a phase or a fling. You were the standard. And by then, you won't even need him to see it, because you'll already know it for yourself. You were showing up every day in ways both big and small. You were emotionally present, invested, and willing to give the relationship a real shot. You texted first sometimes, but not because you were chasing, because you cared. You made plans, remembered the things he said in passing, tried to meet him where he was. You asked questions because you wanted to understand him, not control him. You weren't perfect, but you were real. That's rare. And while you were doing all of that, he was drifting, half there, half somewhere else, responding just enough to keep you close, but never fully engaging in the connection. That dynamic is exhausting. It starts subtly. At first, you're just trying to give him space. You tell yourself he's probably just tired, busy, stressed. You give him the benefit of the doubt because that's who you are. You see the good in people. But as time passes, something starts to feel off. He stops asking how your day was, stops initiating time together. He replies, but without energy. The warmth fades. And deep down, a part of you knows you're showing up while he's checking out. It's hard to admit that, because doing so means confronting the uncomfortable truth that you're only one really holding the connection together. So, you try a little harder. You get more patient. You silence your own needs in hopes that he'll come around if you just stay calm and consistent. But that's not love. That's self-abandonment. And it never works. When someone begins to emotionally withdraw, it's rarely about one specific thing. Most of the time, it's about them. Their capacity, their fear of intimacy, their unresolved baggage. But if you're a giver, if you have a heart that loves deeply, you'll start to internalize their distance as a reflection of your worth. You'll ask, what did I do wrong? When the real question should be, why am I the only one trying? What makes this situation even more painful is how easy it is for the other person to take your effort for granted. They assume you'll always be there, that you'll always send the text, always hold the space, always be the steady one, because you've proven time and time again that you care. But there comes a moment where even the kindest heart runs out of room. And when you finally pull away, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion, that's when the absence hits. That's when they feel the shift. Because people don't often realize what consistency feels like until it's gone. They don't notice how grounding it is to have someone who truly sees them until that person stops showing up. They took your emotional availability for granted, not because you gave too much, but because they never learned how to give in return. They assumed you'd always be the emotional glue until the glue was gone. And here's the irony, the very things they didn't seem to value while they had them are the things they miss most when they lose them. The good morning texts, the thoughtful check-ins, the way you noticed their tone shift before they even said a word, the emotional safety you created for someone who never had the courage to truly step into it. That's when the regret starts. Not right away, sometimes not for months, but it always comes. Because emotional support, kindness, and genuine effort don't grow on trees. And while they were busy checking out, you were offering something extraordinary. Presence, consistency, and emotional depth. Things that don't just happen in every relationship. You were showing up, not to prove something, not to beg, but because it's who you are. And that's something no one can fake, replace, or forget. Not even him. There's a moment after the chaos ends. After the conversations go quiet, after the effort stops, after you finally stop trying to make someone see your value, when silence becomes the most powerful thing you have. You think you need to say more, explain yourself better, get some kind of closure. But what you learn over time is that silence is the closure. It's not the loud goodbye that leaves an impact. It's the space you no longer fill. It's the absence of your voice, your energy, your effort. That's what people feel the most, especially when they've taken your presence for granted. You don't need to announce your worth. You don't need to remind someone what they lost. When you pull back with grace, with no bitterness, no revenge, just quiet strength, that's when the shift happens. That's when they start to feel it. Because people remember consistency. They remember who made them feel seen, who showed up, who cared without condition. And when that presence is suddenly gone, there's no dramatic exit, No chaos to distract them. Just a void where something real used to be. And that silence, it speaks louder than any angry text, late night call, or carefully crafted Instagram post ever could. Because silence can't be argued with. It can't be misquoted, twisted, or ignored. It's not reactive, it's intentional. It's saying, I know my worth, and I don't need to convince you to see it. That kind of silence is heavy. It lingers, it echoes, and it makes people confront what they've lost. It's tempting to try and prove your value by being louder, by making them see how much you cared, how good you were to them, how badly they messed up. But the moment you start explaining yourself to someone who never cared to understand you in the first place, you hand them your power. You make their opinion bigger than it deserves to be. And you forget that real value doesn't need validation. It just is. When you stop responding, when you stop trying to be understood by someone who was never listening, you begin to reclaim your peace. Not in a cold way, not with a wall, but with a boundary. There's a difference. A wall says, I'm still hurt. A boundary says, I've healed enough to move on. And that boundary creates the silence where they used to hear from you every day, where your energy used to meet them. Now there's just nothing. And that nothing is deafening. You were the one who always showed up, who stayed calm, who gave the benefit of the doubt, who tried to keep the connection alive. And now that you've stopped, they start to wonder why. That wondering leads to realization. Realization leads to regret. And regret is quiet. It's not always loud or dramatic, but it sits with them, long after you've gone. The key is out. Your silence can't be performative. It can't be about getting a reaction. It has to come from self-respect, not strategy. Because if you're still checking to see if they notice, you're not really silent. You're still entangled. Real silence happens when you no longer need them to notice. When their reaction doesn't change your direction. That's when your silence becomes your loudest statement. That's when you stop explaining what they should have already seen. And that's when you start attracting people who won't need the silence to understand your value. Because they'll recognize it while you're still speaking. When someone doesn't see your value, it's incredibly easy to start believing you don't have any. You begin to internalize their indifference. The late replies, the emotional distance, the lack of effort, it all starts to whisper lies into your mind. Lies like, maybe I'm not enough, or maybe if I was a little less emotional, a little more chill, a little more interesting. And before you know it, you start shrinking yourself just to fit into a version of you that might have been easier for them to love. But the way someone treats you isn't a mirror of your worth. It's a mirror of their emotional capacity. If they couldn't receive your love, if they didn't appreciate your depth, if they looked away while you were showing up in your most vulnerable, most open form, that's not a reflection of your failure. That's a sign that they were never ready for what you had to give. And yet, so often we rewrite our own identity based on someone who couldn't even show up consistently. We take their confusion and wear it like it's our fault. We carry their fear like it's our burden. We try to be less, so we won't be too much. But the truth is, you weren't too much. You were just enough. For the right person, you were emotionally intelligent. You were aware, intentional, and honest. That is not something to tone down. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to protect. Because not everyone is ready to meet someone at that level. Not everyone wants to go beyond the surface. And when you start editing yourself to be more palatable to people who live on the surface, you lose touch with the very things that make you powerful. Don't make his silence your story. Don't make his neglect your narrative. It's so tempting to believe that if he didn't love you the way you wanted to be loved, then maybe you weren't lovable. But that's the biggest lie of all. He didn't love you properly because he couldn't, or because he chose not to. And either way, that choice belongs to him, not you. You don't owe someone your identity just because they couldn't handle your reality. Your sensitivity, your care, your depth, They're not flaws, they're filters. They protect you from ending up with people who aren't capable of holding what you bring to the table. And yes, those qualities might push away the wrong ones, but they'll also magnetize the right one. The person who doesn't flinch at your truth. The person who leans in when you open up, not away. The person who says, "Thank you for being this real with me," instead of, "You're too much." You can't keep rewriting your value based on people who never took the time to read your story. You can't define your worth through the lens of someone who was never looking clearly to begin with. You were whole before they arrived. You're still whole now that they're gone. Their inability to appreciate you didn't break you. It revealed them. And the moment you stop chasing validation from someone who was never qualified to give it, is the moment you begin to come home to yourself, because your value doesn't need proving. It needs remembering. You're not here to audition for love. You're here to share it with someone who's ready, willing, and emotionally awake enough to receive it of your absence. Someone who won't make you question who you are just because they couldn't recognize what they had. It's one of the most disorienting feelings. Looking at someone you once felt so connected to and wondering what happened. In the beginning, everything felt easy. They were attentive, charming, engaged. They said all the right things. They made you feel special, like they saw something in you that others didn't. You thought, finally, someone who gets me. But then, slowly, that version of them started to fade. They stopped showing up the same way. Conversations became shorter, energy shifted, and the person who once made you feel chosen started to make you feel like a backup plan. It's natural to assume they changed. That something must have happened along the way to cause this switch. But more often than not, the truth is harder to swallow. They didn't change. You just finally saw them clearly. In the beginning, they were presenting the version of themselves they wanted you to see. Maybe even the version they wanted to believe they could be. But that version wasn't sustainable because it wasn't rooted in who they actually were. It was potential. It was promise. It was surface-level compatibility dressed up as emotional availability. When you have a good heart and a hopeful mindset, you tend to focus on who someone could be instead of who they're actually showing up as. You fill in the blanks. You justify red flags with empathy. You call inconsistency having a hard time. You label emotional distance as needing space. You give them chances, not because they earned them, but because you see their pain and you believe love can heal it. And while love is powerful, it can't fix someone who isn't willing to meet you halfway. The hardest part is realizing that the version of them you fell for wasn't the whole picture. And you start to notice the subtle patterns, the avoidance of accountability, the inability to communicate honestly, the habit of withdrawing instead of leaning in. You begin to see that what you thought was emotional depth was really emotional performance. And that realization hurts, not just because you feel miserable, but because it forces you to evaluate the role you played in holding on to the fantasy longer than you should have. But here's where your power returns. The moment you stop trying to drag someone back to the version of themselves that they never really were. The moment you stop fighting for a connection that only existed in your hope, not in reality. You stop asking why they changed, and you start asking why you tolerated the change. You stop focusing on their potential, and you start honoring your standards. Because the real shift isn't when they regret losing you. It's when you stop regretting losing them. They will regret it. At some point, they'll reflect. They'll remember the way you made them feel, the way you showed up, the way you loved without conditions. They'll look around at the people who never got beneath the surface, and they'll realize that what you offered can't be manufactured. But by then, you won't be the same person waiting to be seen. You'll be the person who finally saw yourself. Growth isn't loud. It's not always visible right away. It happens in the quiet moments. When you choose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, truth over fantasy. And when you make those choices consistently, the person who once couldn't value you doesn't get access to you anymore. Not because you're bitter, but because you've outgrown the version of you that settled for almost. They didn't change. You just finally did. You stopped hoping they'd rise to meet you, and you started walking away from anything that required you to shrink. And that's where real freedom begins. There's this moment, after the heartbreak, after the silence, after you've cried all the tears and overanalyzed every detail, when something inside you shifts. You look in the mirror and realize you're still standing, still breathing, still here. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you ask yourself a different question. Not, why wasn't I enough for him? But why did I think he was enough for me? That's the beginning of the glow up. Not the one everyone sees first, the one on the outside, but the real one. The internal shift where you remember who you were before you tried to fit into someone else's small idea of love. At first, you might be tempted to make your comeback all about proving him wrong. Posting the right photos, looking amazing, achieving more, becoming this upgraded version of yourself that screams, "Look what you lost." And sure, there's a certain power in that. But if your glow up is built on revenge, you're still giving him space in your story. You're still letting him define the narrative. The most powerful transformation doesn't happen when you're trying to make someone regret losing you. It happens when you no longer care whether they do or not. Because here's the truth, healing doesn't begin when they miss you. It begins when you stop needing them to. When you stop refreshing your feed to see if they watched your story. When you stop fantasizing about them waking up one day, realizing they made a mistake, and running back. It begins when your focus turns inward, when your peace becomes more important than their opinion. That's when the glow up becomes real, not an aesthetic, not a performance, a state of being. You start making choices for you. You start building a life that reflects your values, your energy, your worth. Not a life curated for someone else's attention, but one that feels like home to you. You surround yourself with people who actually see you. You say no more easily. You set boundaries without guilt. You stop confusing attention with affection and silence with strength. And every time you do, you reinforce the truth you almost forgot you are enough, exactly as you are, without needing to be chosen by someone who failed to choose you. There's something magnetic about someone who knows their worth and doesn't need to prove it. That kind of confidence can't be faked. It's earned through pain, through letting go, through rebuilding piece by piece. And while he might eventually realize what he lost, by then, you'll have already moved past the version of yourself that waited for that validation. His regret will arrive, but it won't matter, because you'll be too full, too whole, too far gone to care. Your glow up isn't about replacing him. It's not about showing him what he missed. It's about becoming the kind of person you almost forgot you were. Someone who gives love freely, but never begs for it. Someone who sees their own reflection and feels pride, not doubt. Someone who no longer chases the bare minimum and instead expects what they deserve. Let him regret ignoring you. Let that be his burden to carry. But your path forward, that's for you. And it's not fueled by proving anyone wrong. It's built on the quiet, unshakable truth that you were the gift all along. Now you just get to live like it. So if you take nothing else from this, remember this, you were the gift. Not because you were perfect, not because you never made mistakes, but because you showed up with honesty, with heart, with a love that was real. You brought something into his life that most people are too guarded, too distracted, or too afraid to offer emotional presence. And he ignored it. He didn't see it. Or worse, he saw it and thought it would always be there. Let him regret it. Let him sit with the silence you once filled with effort, care, and loyalty. But don't spend your life waiting for that regret to come. Because the point isn't to be missed. The point is to move on. This is your moment now. Not to prove anything to him, but to prove everything to yourself. That you're no longer available for people who take you for granted. That your peace, your standards, your worth are not up for negotiation. You're not looking for someone to complete you. You already are. So go become the version of yourself that even you are in awe of. Because when you do, the people who couldn't see your value, they won't be able to reach you. Not because you're playing games, but because you've outgrown the level they stayed stuck at. Feel the weight your absence. You don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You just need to remember who you are. And never again forget it for someone who didn't deserve to hold your heart.